Hello, good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Donald C. Stewart and I'm here in the Broadcasting Scotland studio and joined remotely by former MSP Maureen Watt. Absolutely delighted to see you tonight. Maureen, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me again. It's great to be with you. I think this is the first time we've been on together, Donald. So
it is indeed, Maureen. Looking very much forward to it. And as we go into the news from today, the update from Ukraine on day 251 of the illegal war waged by Russia against the Ukrainian people. Kyiv continues to recover from yesterday's barrage of Russian missile strikes on hydroelectric plants and other critical energy and water infrastructure. Crews were able to restore water and lights to the 270,000 homes in Kyiv today, but Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko warned that it might be a while longer before crews will be able to restore full electricity. Part of that reason being, of course, will be that Russia is continuously targeting Ukraine's energy and water infrastructure. Ukrainians are looking ahead and looking towards what will likely be a cold and difficult winter and asking for donations and of autonomous electricity and heat sources. It's now 1 week after Russian authorities relocated 70,000 civilians from the right bank of the Dnipro River to the left. Russian authorities are now reported to be moving 70,000 civilians from the left bank to be temporarily resettled deep into the Kherson region, as well as to other regions of the Russian Federation. And the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces believe that about 650 Russian soldiers were killed in the country over the last day. The State Emergency Service of Ukraine has confirmed that at least one person has been killed by a Russian strike in Mykolaiv overnight. Ukraine's Ministry of Defence said it has intelligence that Iran plans on sending a batch, worryingly, of more than 200 combat drones to the Russian Federation in early November. Meanwhile, a Russian court on Tuesday fined Wikipedia owner Wikimedia Foundation 2 million rubles, the equivalent of £28,200, over articles relating to the Ukraine war. Off in Finland, their Prime Minister Sanna Marin has urged Hungary and Turkey to swiftly approve the Swedish and Finnish applications for NATO membership. Meanwhile, the Turkish Defence Minister, Hulusi Akar, has told Ukraine's defence and infrastructure ministers that keeping the Black Sea grain export deal going is of great importance, and that as a humanitarian initiative, it should be kept separate from the conflict in Ukraine. 12 export grain ships left Ukraine Monday despite Russia's decision to pull out of that vital Black Sea grain deal, Ukraine's Minister of Infrastructure was able to confirm. Moscow, however, have called ship movements through the Black Sea security corridor unacceptable. In a statement, the Russian Defence Ministry said it wanted commitments from Ukraine not to use the Black Sea grain corridor for military purposes. The UN disputed Moscow's claim that a civilian cargo ship carrying Ukrainian grain may have been involved in a drone strike against Russia. In the region, a 40% cut in deliveries of Russia's natural gas is hitting Moldova's ability to provide sufficient electricity for its 2.5 million people, the Deputy Prime Minister of the small former Soviet state has said. And Maureen, every day seems to be slightly more worrying. Every day seems to be slightly more news that is of a bleak and dark nature, and we're heading towards a very difficult time for the Ukrainians because they will no doubt have a very harsh winter. So it looks very bleak indeed.
It certainly does, and I think because Russia are not managing to make any progress fighting the war on the ground, they are turning to other things like hitting civilian utilities. And as you say, in the run-up to winter, that is very worrying, and it's trying to break their spirit. But, I don't think that's going to work. It just seems to increase the resolve to stand up to Russia. And I also heard that some civilians or refugees were thinking of going back, but have been told not to. But that must be very upsetting for them and their menfolk who are still there fighting the war. So, yes, it doesn't look good, does it?
Certainly does not. And if the Ukrainians are looking for a tough winter, unsurprisingly, in the United Kingdom, it looks as though not only those who are dealing with the cost of living crisis, but public services are looking forward to a fairly bleak winter, as there was a warning today of tax rises and cuts to public services ahead of the United Kingdom government's autumn statement. Rishi Sunak is preparing years of tax rises for Britain in an effort to make up for a £50 billion fiscal hole left by Liz Truss's disastrous tenure over 44 days in Downing Street, according to many reports. After a meeting between the Prime Minister and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt on Monday, the plan to the upcoming autumn statement, according to a Treasury source, was that things were going to get rough. Both Sunak and his Chancellor reportedly agreed that tough decisions needed to be undertaken due to the eye-watering size of the blow to public finances dealt by Truss's mini-budget. Hunt is reportedly looking to implement an equal split of 50% tax rises and 50% spending cuts, which could translate into £25 billion in hikes for taxpayers. During the austerity years of the coalition government, the then Chancellor George Osborne worked from a formula of 80% cuts and 20% tax measures. Responding to the reports of stealth taxes and real terms cut in public services and public sector pay, Ian Blackford MP said, "No one voted for this, and Rishi Sunak has no mandate to press ahead with these appalling Tory cuts in the face of public opposition." The SNP Westminster leader repeated calls for an election and said the public have a right to decide the way forward from this Tory economic crisis. He added, "The Tories trashed the UK economy and now they are forcing the public to foot the bill for their catastrophic mistakes by raising taxes, slashing public services and cutting incomes." With the Labour Party joining the Tories in support for Brexit and cuts, independence is the only way to escape long-term decline and put Scotland back on the path to prosperity. Of course, Maureen, you were at one point, I believe, the Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government, and it would be a worry to see any cut in any public service. But for the most vulnerable, this is a very, very worrying time, surely.
Yes, it's already very worrying with the price hikes in energy, and people are really cutting back. You know, we hear of people deciding whether they can eat or heat, and perhaps some days both. But I just cannot understand why people would still support the Tory government. I mean, as you say, Donald, they've crushed the economy. They've taken us out of Europe, which of course is never mentioned, that contributes about at least 25% of the crash in the economy that we're seeing. And for people who already think and know that since 2008, since this government came to power, we've been living in austerity compared to other Western nations. It is just so draining for everybody, and most of all for those that have got the smallest shoulders. So I can't make up my mind whether they're saying it's going to be really bad and it is going to be really bad, or whether they're trying to butter us up so that when it comes it doesn't look as bad as it might have been. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what's the case on that. But in any way, we are going to see, as you say, tax rises. I hope the broadest shoulders will take the biggest hit on that. Ahima Doots. But on the other side, cuts to public services will be really difficult. We know that councils are really struggling already, and you can see that the Scottish Government are going to have to make very tough decisions on on their fixed budget they're going to have to cut, because cuts are already having to be made because of, quite right in my view, wage rise demands. And so it's just a perfect storm for those in government in Scotland.
And of course, if there is a blame to be laid at the door of the UK government over creating a storm that they're now going to have to fix. Further news today of counter-terrorism police taking over the Dover Migrant Centre with a firebombing. Counter-terrorism police are now leading the investigation into that firebombing in Dover at the Migrant Centre, suspecting a hate-filled grievance may be behind the attack. Kent Police said the man suspected of carrying out Sunday's attack travelled from his home in High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire. He was found dead at a police station close to the Migrant Centre shortly after the attack. Police stressed they had not classed the attack as terrorism at this stage, but the knowledge and tactics of specialist investigators were now thought necessary as the case developed. Police said counter-terrorism officers had been assisting the investigation since the start, with assistance from MI5, the security service that leads on combating the threat of extremist far-right violence. The bomber arrived at the centre and a number of crude incendiary devices were thrown outside and into the premises by a man who arrived at the scene alone in a car, police said. Photographs of the suspected attack showed a man releasing a plastic bottle taped to a lit firework on Dover Harbour's western jet foil, where Border Force officers process people who have crossed the channel in small boats. The suspect was confirmed dead shortly after the incident at a petrol station. For an act of violence to be treated as potential terrorism, there needs to be a belief it may have been politically or ideologically motivated. Speaking in the Commons on Monday, the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper asked whether counter-terrorist officers were investigating the incident. It does not make sense for them not to be, she said. Maureen, the heightening of the language that has been used by the Home Secretary, the Daily Mail type of description of very much the view that it's being peddled down south in terms of immigration and migrants and so on, can often fuel just exactly what it is that we're seeing in terms of threats of violence, violence being carried out, and indeed a hardening of attitudes from those who are likely to act upon those, leading to very many vulnerable people being put at risk.
Yes, unfortunately so. The incident does seem to have been a sole, lone, troubled person carrying this out. But you then say, well, how many others are there, even although he seems to have been working alone? But I wonder whether the focus on the counter-terrorism aspect is trying to get away from the fact that the centre at Dover is hugely overcrowded, in the words of the prisons inspector himself, is not fit for purpose, and that the Home Office under Suella Braverman really needs to get a grip of this and get it sorted out. So I wonder whether, as I say, the counter-terrorism involvement, of which of course there must be, but is not trying to deflect away from the real problems that the UK government is unable, and I would say unwilling, to really get a grip of the migrant crisis in Dover. And coming into winter, the idea of people lying on a flimsy mat or rug in a marquee is just horrific. We are supposed to be not a third world country, but a civilised country, and this is not dealing with people in a civil and socially just manner.
And further blows to the UK government's recent plans on the energy cap came today when the Institute of Public Policy Research said that Jeremy Hunt should allow the energy price cap to run beyond the existing 6-month deadline to act as a shock absorber that would reduce inflation and give consumers £90 billion worth of extra spending power. The IPPR said the energy price cap could repay the exchequer in lower wage demands and lower interest rates, boosting economic growth and raising tax receipts. In a report ahead of the Chancellor's 17th November autumn statement, the IPPR said the funds released from preventing a deep recession could be used to support public services and boost welfare and pension payments. The IPPR also warned that tax rises would be needed to give Hunt leeway to support households and businesses, in particular from a broader windfall tax on the extra profits generated by energy companies. A report by the Resolution Foundation called on ministers to use the 17th of November autumn statement to consider tax rises on households and businesses that have prospered through the pandemic and are relatively insulated from the cost of living crisis. The Foundation said the Chancellor should avoid a tax on public services and welfare benefits, which have already suffered from 12 years of austerity. It warned Hunt that cuts to public infrastructure spending would save money on the short term but depress growth over the rest of the decade. Also today, the Chief Executive of National Grid has warned of an exponential increase in consumers seeking help with their energy bills as the company created a £50 million emergency support fund. John Pettigrew said the UK Electricity Network Operators Fund will be used this winter and next to make donations to bodies providing support for vulnerable households and advice on energy efficiency measures to lower bills long term. The move comes amid fears that the cost of living crisis and high energy bills will push growing numbers of households into fuel poverty this winter. Maureen, it appears that almost everybody apart from the UK government seems to have woken up, trying to find a way of helping, and indeed in some cases putting their money where their mouth is and putting the help where it's needed.
Yes, we keep calling this a mini budget, don't we? But I mean, it's going to have to be really, in my view, like a normal budget in order to do something about all the strands that are needing attention in the economy. And, you know, this is really an opportunity to make the shift away from trickle-down economics that has been the hallmark of Tory governments, to actually make society more equal and fairer. And we know that everybody benefits if society is more equal and more fair. So I wonder if we'll actually see something like that really needs to happen now, if the UK is ever going to get out of the mess that it's got itself into. And if they don't, then, as you say, Donald, we're going to see more people in fuel poverty, and the energy companies recognise that by setting up the fund. I agree with you that the energy bills cap will have to be extended past March. We could still be in the depths of winter in Scotland at that time of year, given the vagaries of the Scottish weather. And families are not going to recover from the increase in the fuel bills anyway, never mind the money that they're getting to help with them. So this mini budget is really going to, I think, have loads and loads of people watching, whether they might not have done before, in order to see exactly where the UK government intends to go with this. But I'm not hopeful. I'm not holding my breath that we'll actually see something sensible from them.
I suppose, Maureen, it's interesting that, you know, the mini budget was an absolute car crash. The Suella Braverman's appearance in front of the House of Commons with regards to the migrant centre and the question marks over what she's signed, what she hasn't signed. Maybe she put it in an email to somebody who's to know. But, you know, there seems to be daily, weekly, it's hard to say monthly because of the current number of high held offices within the UK government that change almost on a weekly, hourly basis. But there are so many things that are self-inflicted wounds that it's hard to know where to place your trust in somebody who's going to actually bring that ball of wool back together, just as you were saying, in terms of the strands of the budget. And it needs something very, very radical to make a difference. Because I think when we came out of, didn't we talk about when we were coming out of the pandemic, things were going to be different. Society was going to be revolutionised. There was going to be an evolution at best, revolution at worst, or just something different in the way that we lived our lives. But it doesn't seem to be there at all.
No, it absolutely doesn't. And, you know, it's difficult to comprehend that here in Britain that we had a PM, albeit for just a few weeks, that actually crashed the economy. It's really unbelievable. And, for anybody to put their trust in the Tories now to get this right must be living in some sort of cloud cuckoo land. I mean, they're not even prepared to take the views of economic think tanks other than very right-wing ones, which caused the problem in the first place. That's who Liz Truss was following. Or their senior civil servants who are tasked to do these kind of things. They seem to think that they know better than civil servants that have been doing things for ages. Okay, you can criticize them, but in the main, they are extremely competent people. And, I suppose there is the old adage, if you put three economists in a room, you'll get 4 or 5 different answers. But so that brings me back to my point that, do they know what their philosophy is? Do they have a core belief that you can sort of then devise your budget around? And for just, since Boris Johnson came to power, they seem to just have been flailing about. I haven't read their 2019 manifesto. They keep saying that we need to go back to that. But, I can't recall that it had many principles on economics in it. So it's all really worrying, really, really worrying. And the sooner we have an election and they're out in the cold for decades, the better. But we really need our independence referendum to get the type of policies that we need for Scotland, made in Scotland, by Scottish people, for Scottish people.
Further economic news this very day, hot on the heels of Shell announcing massive profits. BP have announced that they have made a £7 billion profit in the third quarter. Bumper profits of £8.2 billion has seen profits soar for BP this year as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has pushed up wholesale gas prices. It says the performance of its gas business had been exceptional. The company is expected to pay around $800 million, which is £693 million in windfall tax on its North Sea operations this year. However, UK government ministers are considering whether to extend the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas operators. BP said the windfall tax figure covered the 7 months from the levy's introduction until the end of the year, and its total tax bill on its North Sea operations this year would be about $2.5 billion. Analysts had expected a drop-off in BP's huge profits to around about $6.6 billion in the third quarter of the year, after it raked in $8.5 billion in the second quarter, a 14-year profit high. However, the slowdown was smaller than expected, despite BP noting weaker refining margins and lower oil prices. The third quarter profit of $8.2 billion far outstrips the $3.3 billion of underlying profits recorded in the equivalent period of 2021. Scottish Greens Energy and Environment spokesman Mark Russell MSP said the oil and gas giants may be raking in utterly obscene profits, but the planet is suffering, and so are millions of households across the UK and beyond. Maureen, that's eye-shattering figures. To talk in billions of profit for 3 months, not a whole year, but a quarter, a 3-month period, whilst we're also talking about slashed budgets and people struggling and the non-extension of the energy cap and so on, and knowing that it's not the cap that it's suggested it will be, but it is something that's a help, but it's not the panacea. Very, very worrying. But on top of that, and it's interesting, the Green spokesman there's environmental impact that comes along with the great profits that are being made by these companies.
Absolutely. I mean, to put it in some sort of context, 7 billion is about a sixth of the Scottish Government's annual budget from Westminster. That's putting it in context. It's a phenomenal amount of money. And you hear the oil company chief executives themselves saying that they should be subject to a windfall tax. So whether in this up and coming budget the Chancellor actually reviews that will be interesting, because that's one thing. If I was in his place, I would increase the windfall tax on the oil companies. They talk a very good game and have very good lobbyists in the UK government, talking to the UK government. But they've got broad shoulders and they can meet these increased windfall taxes. But I would invest that money in retrofitting our housing stock. Excuse me. Many people can be employed in good jobs doing that, and it would begin to make a real difference to the housing stock, but also create jobs, create meaningful jobs for people to then spend their money in the local economies. That's the kind of getting the economy moving that you need, not some sort of top-down type of goodness knows what they're thinking of in terms of stimulating growth. But that could happen, and it could happen throughout the country, which would really begin to make a difference to local communities.
And phenomenal numbers are prevalent today in news that Scottish exports have slumped since Brexit, as new figures show a £2.2 billion slump in Scottish exports since we came out of the European Community. HMRC data published today shows the value of Scotland's exports fell from £16.741 billion in 2019, the year before the United Kingdom exited the European Union, to £14.528 billion in 2021, a drop of over 13% in 2 years. Prior to Brexit, Scotland's exports to European Union countries were consistently rising, with an increase of £420 million between 2018 and 2019. The European market, which is 7 times the size of the United Kingdom, is clearly a place to go and trade. The Scottish Chambers of Commerce have said that Scottish exporters are reporting that they continue to face growing challenges trading with countries in the European Union post-Brexit. New customs procedures, tariffs, regulatory barriers and transport disruption are consistently cited as the top challenges facing firms. Commenting, SNP business spokesperson Stephen Flynn MP said, Brexit has been an unmitigated disaster for Scotland. The multi-billion-pound damage to Scottish exports is a national scandal and shows Brexit is an act of economic vandalism. Independence is now the only way to regain our place in Europe and get back on the road to prosperity. With the Labour Party joining the Tories and ruling out any return to the European Union, there's no route back to Europe and no escaping long-term economic decline under Westminster control. Maureen, you referred to Brexit being the thing that has gone off the agenda, gone out of the news. But here is a very obvious reason why having a party who want to rejoin the Commonwealth, if you like, of European nations is exactly what we should be looking for, looking towards in terms of leadership, whilst other parties seem to be abandoning the idea of getting back into the markets and getting back on track with growth.
I know, it just makes me weep, Donald, when we talk about Brexit and the damage that it has done. I mean, when the Scottish Government came in 2007, there was a concerted effort to sell Scotland's wonderful produce abroad and increase that. And, you know, if you think of the work that James Withers did when he was at Scotland Food and Drink until very recently, he, along with all the producers, really went about increasing the markets abroad in Europe of our wonderful produce, whether it be our seafood, our beef, and all the food and drink that we add value to in Scotland and export. And to see it just decimated by coming out of Brexit is really, really sad. sad and tragic. I mean, I know of fish processors who just since Brexit have not even bothered to try and get back into the European market because it just is so difficult, as you said, to send smaller consignments abroad. And, you know, even if you take them down to the Hab and Larrack and try and get them into bigger bulk, it probably means that the produce is hanging about instead of getting straight to the market at Boulogne-sur-Mer. So it has been, and nobody can deny, it has been an unmitigated disaster for a huge sector of the Scottish economy. And, you know, looking for other markets, which we have done for years, is not going to make up for, as you said, Donald, the huge marketplace that we had in Europe. And we were increasing that year on year by substantial numbers. And it's now all gone for nothing. It really is a disaster, absolute disaster. It makes me weep.
And further blows to the Home Office today was the judicial review, which has heard that the Home Office is putting 2.6 million European Union citizens at risk of removal, at risk of detention or removal from the country by the Home Office, as was heard in the High Court today. Claim was made at a judicial review of the Home Office's implementation of the part of the withdrawal agreement guaranteeing the rights of about 6 million European Union citizens living in the country before Brexit. Mr Justice Lane was told that the Home Office's rules contain a fundamental feature which threatens the right of a person to live, work, retire or get access to healthcare. The case is being brought by the Independent Monitoring Authority, which is a statutory body set up to protect the rights of European Union citizens settled in the country before Brexit. The effect of the Secretary of State scheme is that those persons will automatically lose their rights to reside in the UK, making them an illegal overstayer who is liable to detention or removal, according to Robert Palmer, KC, for the IMA, who told the court this in his opening argument. The fundamental feature only affects those citizens who were in the UK for fewer than 5 years and who were granted temporary residency status, known as pre-settled status. Under the government's rules, those with the status are obliged to reapply for permanent or settled status once their pre-settled status expires at the end of 5 years. About 5.8 million European Union citizens were granted status to remain settled in the United Kingdom, but 2.6 million were granted pre-settled status because they had been in the country for fewer than 5 years. Any of those 2.6 million who failed to apply for what Palmer called the upgrade will automatically be stripped of their employment, social and residency rights under the present rules, the court was told. This is because they then fall under the scope of regular immigration laws. Maureen, hanging about doesn't seem to be a very positive thing, especially if you're dealing with a Home Office, because we have people who have settled here for a period of time, paid their taxes, contributed to their communities, and it looks as though instead of hanging about in order to contribute, they're going to be flung out because they haven't filled the paperwork out right, or there's a flaw within the way that they're being treated.
I mean, I can't imagine seeing families in Aberdeen who have been here, as you say, for 5 years, came here for the work that was available and the work that was needing done, now being in our school, well settled in our schools, learning Polish and then Doric, now missing out the English. That's a joke, by the way, but it does happen. To have the threat of them being their home being knocked at dawn, to be thrown out of the country, just doesn't bear thinking of in the country. It just workers in the country. I mean, they can't deal with them that they've got so-called illegal mining across the channel because they can't process them quick. And people are, instead of waiting 6 months to find out what their status is, waiting for over a year, so they can't work. And now we're talking about removing people who came here before Brexit, are going to be chucked out too. I mean, talk about crashing the economy even more than you've done already. What goes on in these people's minds? I mean, we need folk to come into the country. We talked about our food and drink industry. One of the reasons that it's going down is because we haven't got people to pick the wonderful and process the wonderful food that we've got, even if we had the markets. So it's just an incredible situation that we found ourselves under a Tory government that's supposed to be well educated, educated in Oxbridge, and they can't even think in a common sense way about how to deal with the mess they've got in. Please, 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 can we have the referendum as quickly as possible so that we can get out of this mess? We didn't vote for it. We don't vote for them. It's so undemocratic.
Well, somebody who has hung about and got flung out and maybe flung out again is former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, who is off to the jungle. He's had the Tory whip suspended after it emerged he was getting posted up the jungle for "I'm a celebrity, get me out of here." The former UK Health Secretary will be the 12th contestant to enter the ITV reality show, which features famous faces performing gruelling tasks such as being smothered in insects or eating kangaroo penis. However, the MP for West Suffolk has faced a backlash from Conservative MPs and his constituency party over his taking part and will now sit as an independent. The show overlaps with time when the Commons is sitting. The Conservative Chief Whip, Simon Hart, said he believed the matter was serious enough to warrant suspension of the whip with immediate effect. While Andy Drummond, the Deputy Chair of the West Suffolk Conservative Association, said, "I'm looking forward to him eating a kangaroo's penis. You can quote me on that." This week, Hancock pulled out of the running to chair the Treasury Select Committee and announced a new book, Pandemic Diaries, on his experiences as Health Secretary during the COVID crisis. He resigned as Health Secretary last year after CCTV footage was leaked showing him kissing his closest aide, Gina Coladangelo, in his ministerial office in breach of his own COVID rules on social distancing. I'm a Celebrity returns to the Queensland jungle in Australia for the first time in 2 years after it relocated to Wales during the pandemic. Could this be the year that viewers vote to leave a contestant in the jungle? Given, Maureen, the mess that they've made of everything else, would it not be better to just simply allow Matt Hancock to stay in the Commons and ship the rest off to Australia?
You think more all the 12 should be MPs in the jungle this year? Well, you know how great the man has fallen. I mean, to go from being Health Secretary to being a contestant in the I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here is just unbelievable. I heard a quote from him that he said that he would be able to, it was not what commune wasn't the word, but get to know 12 million people who watch it and commune with them. Well, what utter nonsense. I mean, I hope that the other contestant makes sure that he does all the worst tasks possible. I'm not going to quote the chair of his constituency association, but this is somebody who earns 86,000 plus for being in the Commons when the Commons is sitting and being in his constituency at other times of the week. And, you know, for the vast majority of people, if that's not enough, then, you know, he shouldn't be standing for Parliament in the first place. But I mean, we saw Boris Johnson have his holidays while the Commons was sitting too. And I just wonder how many of them really do think that they haven't got a hope in hell's chance of getting re-elected, so are looking for other things that might provide some sort of income in the future. But I mean, Nadine Dorris was in it at one time, wasn't she? I mean, I've never watched it. I think when I did see it on, it looked as if it was worse than watching paint dry. But, you know, this idea that all politicians need to be celebrities as well is actually one of the things that make the UK and UK democracy not working at the moment, unworkable at the moment. It's just personality after personality. Who's going to be next? Liz Truss?
I'm quite sure that there might be quite a few people who would vote for that. Of course, Nadine Dorris, you mentioned. Kezia Dugdale was another who'd gone in. Who can wipe from their memory George Galloway in terms of these programmes? It's important to remember that the Health Secretary's role is an exceptionally important one. And, you know, we're currently facing a very, very difficult time and a very difficult crisis. So to leave the country and go and do this particular programme is by itself a difficult one to comprehend. But on top of that, almost every single politician who's gone into the jungle has talked about getting their message out to more people. And then when they have come back, have realised that they have no control over how it is edited, and many of their speeches and pontifications have been lost because it doesn't make good viewing, much like their speeches, one would imagine, in the House of Commons. So you have to question why it is that they would even contemplate, unless, as you've just said, it's about another career.
You raise an interesting point, though. He's going to have to go in front of the COVID Committee of Inquiry at some point. Has he made sure he wasn't going to be called at the time that he is out in Australia? That's an interesting point. I hope the inquiry is not held up because, you know, he's away in Australia and getting paid too much. That'll be interesting to see.
And in further depressing international news, it has emerged that Russian mercenaries have been accused of civilian massacres in Mali. A new massacre of civilians following a major military operation in the centre of the unstable country. At least 13 civilians were killed on Sunday in the region of Mopti by Malayan troops, supported by white soldiers, local elected officials and an official of a community association told the Agence France-Presse. Fighters from the Kremlin-linked Wagner group arrived in Mali late last year after a lucrative deal was struck with its new military rulers. They have been deployed on a series of offensives against Islamist groups linked to allegations of atrocities who control large parts of the country. The reported massacre appears to have occurred during a large-scale airborne operation in a region known as a stronghold for Islamist groups. Airstrikes were followed by a ground assault by Malayan troops, and suspected Wagner fighters near the town of Tenenkau, local sources have said. The information was confirmed by another local official. Those killed included a woman, her daughter and her granddaughter, the source told AFP. A resident of Gualeji said the village was attacked because the army and the white soldiers of Wagner considered it to be an Islamist extremist stronghold. Mali's military rulers, who took power in a coup in May last year, have said the thousands or more Russian paramilitaries in the country are instructors and not deployed in combat roles. Maureen, it's lies, damned lies and statistics was what I was brought up to believe. It would appear that Russian propaganda has not changed much since the Soviet age, and it seems to tell a lot of stories but not necessarily have a connection to the truth. And their role internationally is one that even before Ukraine should certainly have had more of a focus on.
Yes, and we shouldn't be surprised that it's a throwback to the Soviet era because Putin was a top spy, was he not, in the Soviet era? And I think he still lives by that ideology. And I think, you know, that is responsible for him invading Ukraine. I find it deeply, deeply disturbing that the Russians are in Africa. I mean, it's worrying enough that the Chinese have such influence in Africa too. You know, this is why it's so important for Britain and elected officials and members to be making sure that they go to all the international gatherings, like, for example, COP27, to make sure that the influence of China and Russia isn't allowed to spread without any contradiction from any other, well, from democracies, basically, because that's what Russia and China want to do. They want to destroy democracy, in my view, in the world. And they go for the weakest countries first, where that is a possibility. And I think that's what we're seeing with Mali. Goodness knows what they've promised the leaders in the way of bribes and corruption to do this. But it is really very worrying in the long term as to what, in this case, Russia is doing in Africa.
And in better news, long-term support for Ukrainian refugees has been announced in Scotland, supported to make choices about their future whilst living with us. Following a review of the Scottish Government's super sponsor scheme, which was paused in July, a paper has been published giving details of the work undertaken by the review. It includes 16 interventions aiming to better support people who have fled the war in Ukraine to integrate into communities across the whole of Scotland. These measures have a particular emphasis on accommodation, as well as a focus on ensuring people have access to employment advice and support. As part of this work, the Minister with Special Responsibility for Refugees from Ukraine, Neil Gray, announced more than £6 million worth of funding has been allocated to Aberdeen City Council from the Ukraine Longer Term Resettlement Fund to enable the council to bring around 500 void properties back into use, making more longer-term accommodation available across the city. The paper also outlines the 7 criteria for reopening the super sponsor scheme, which will remain paused for new applications for the time being, in order to improve its sustainability and ultimately help to better support displaced people from Ukraine now and in the future. Mr. Gray said, "As a nation, we continue to stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. We know that our super sponsor scheme has provided an additional and immediate route to safety. Our communities have welcomed thousands of people fleeing the war. Scottish families have opened their homes, and our local authorities and third sector partners are working round the clock to provide often traumatised people with the safety and support they need." Maureen, Aberdeen, of course, is your neck of the woods, as it were, and you were MSP up there for some time. Across the whole of Scotland, there's been a welcome, but it certainly should be a welcome up in Aberdeen that funding is going to be there in order to help open up accommodation for the refugees, but potentially, I would imagine, also if those are void properties that are going to come back into circulation, would help the economy in some fashion in the longer term.
Yes, the previous Labour Tory administration was very bad at getting empty properties back into circulation and back available for rent. So, excuse me, this extra money is really welcome in the city, as are the Ukrainian refugees. And the sooner they can get into their own settled accommodation, then it makes them easier for the kids to focus on their schoolwork and parents to look for employment. So it's, I'm really proud of the way Scotland has accepted refugees, whether it be the Syrians beforehand. There are a large number of Syrian refugees in Aberdeenshire as well as the city, and they have settled really well. And given that we have so many vacancies for jobs, it's great that we have potentially some people coming on to the labour market, albeit in very traumatic circumstances for them, and maybe temporary, but at least they will feel better themselves being able to make a contribution to the society and the communities that have taken them in.
And you mentioned there, Maureen, all about the participation of children and young people from Ukraine in their education. And news today that schools across Scotland are to take part in a new outdoor learning programme where schools have signed up to pilot this new exciting programme designed to improve outdoor learning and connect pupils with nature. Environmental charity Keep Scotland Beautiful is kicking off a pilot of the International Learning About Forests, LEAF, programme in January 2023 as part of its Climate Action Schools framework. LEAF is a programme from the Foundation for Environmental Education. This programme is an exciting opportunity for schools and nurseries to meet their learning for sustainability goals while supporting pupils to connect with nature. The key focus of the programme is to promote and expand outdoor education and connection with nature for young people. In doing so, we hope to give young people a deeper and more involved understanding of the natural world, and in so doing, so enhance their understanding and passion for tackling the climate and nature emergency. 55 schools from 21 local authorities will be part of the pilot and will take part in training to help support them in working through the award. Feedback from the pilot schools will help Keep Scotland Beautiful shape the award to make it as accessible as possible. The Education and Learning Officer at Keep Scotland Beautiful, Nicola Davidson, commented, "We are delighted to announce the 55 schools that will form our LEAF pilot programme. These schools, while working towards their learning for sustainability goals, are also helping us develop the programme for other schools in the country. The pilot programme will run until July, and if successful and funding is secured, it is hoped LEAF will be expanded and offered to all schools as part of our Climate Action Schools framework." Maureen, we often hear the cliche about the environment being something for future generations and we are gatekeepers for their future and so on. But this would appear to be a very practical way of getting into people's psyche for the future and making sure that we have inquiring minds making difficult decisions and choices and asking those difficult questions as we go on. And it seems to be a very positive way forward.
Absolutely, and we see more and more nurseries and early years education being done in the outdoors, so that people learn through play and working in their natural environment. And you see young children using hammers and saws quite proficiently. A bit scary, I think, for parents, but well supervised and well inducted in using tools. So I always think that if learning can be made practical and the practical implementation of what you've learned is shown at a very early age, then it makes learning much more exciting if you can see what you've learned having a meaningful purpose, and that can so much better in the outdoors rather than sitting at a desk. So I very much welcome this. I haven't read about it, but whether it means that more of our outdoor centres will be used, because many of them closed during COVID and haven't reopened. So it will be interesting to see how this develops. And I think it's another feather in the cap for progressive Scottish education.
It's an interesting thing. If you mentioned the way in which some nurseries and early years centres, or they're now early years centres, are managing to get children increasingly out into their environment and to experience that, and that form of experiential learning and that thrust of Scottish education, which of course the OECD report suggested the curriculum for excellence was indeed working and working well, and an engagement with that process of widening the offer to children and young people to make them ready for the 21st century rather than stuck in the sort of formation of schooling of the 19th and the early 20th century because they were fodder for factories, I think is something that as a nation we should indeed be incredibly proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people, even in 2007, when we took over government, I was made Minister for Schools and Skills, we had to get the implementation of Curriculum for Excellence back on track because it kind of had fallen behind. And even then in the early stages, people were coming from other countries to see how we were doing this. They were really impressed by how innovative Scotland is. And Curriculum for Excellence, I think, has proved itself to be brilliant, and it's still evolving. Children are doing apprenticeships, foundation apprenticeships in schools, perhaps instead of something more academic. This idea that everybody goes to university and we don't need everybody to go to university is absolutely nonsense. There are loads of children doing foundation apprenticeships and being able to see what exactly it is, the type of career that they want to go into, and in some cases it really reinvigorates learning. So Curriculum for Excellence is not something that's static, it's always evolving, and I think Scotland should be very proud of it.
Indeed, and that is indeed all we have time for. First of all, my very grateful thanks to Maureen for joining us this evening, and certainly has been the first time. I'm hoping it will not be the last, but maybe next time we'll hear a little bit of Doric as I try to translate into Lallans and we have more of a discussion. So thank you very much, Maureen.
You're welcome.
But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has already donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, on behalf of all of us here, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you haven't already, please consider £5 a month becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So from me, Donald C. Stewart, here in the... That's all right. It's okay. Sorry, good night and thank you for watching.